Okay, students, I know a lot of you are pretty worried about how this critical race theory bill is going to affect your school experience. So we've put together this little guide to help ease your minds. Now keep in mind that the list of words that could be banned here in Wisconsin is almost 100 words long, so please bear with us. Luckily, we can group a lot of the words together thematically to help us remember what they are. So let's dive right in. No more will you be able to use the word intersection. Just don't do it. It's on the list. Likewise, intersectionality and intersectional identities. Lawmakers, of course, want to stop you from using the word as Kimberly Crenshaw first did to talk about how things like race and class and gender come together and create a sort of exponential oppression. But the next time you want to say, look out the window where Jimmy's about to be hit by a car while crossing at the intersection, make sure you substitute the words cross street or something. Moving right along, best to avoid the word critical. It's not technically listed by itself, but we're not going to be able to say critical pedagogy, critical self-awareness, critical ethnic studies, or critical self-reflection. I do want to say here, in the politician's defense, God only knows how ugly it must be when these lawmakers start really digging deep and thinking about where their own perspectives come from. So I'm sure they are just trying to protect you from the same torture. That was a joke. These guys have clearly never considered what a perspective is, let alone where they come from. But in all seriousness, truth is only true when it's pretty, and at least we can still say God. Now, technically, you'll still be able to say race and even racism. Maybe the bill makers didn't want to be too obvious here, but honestly, I just wouldn't. You definitely won't be able to say racial justice, racialized identity, race essentialism, racial supremacy, or racial prejudice. Nope. Keep it to racism if you have to say anything related to certain foundational American truths, but make sure you don't say anti-racism. That one's a no-no. Only pro-racism statements around here from now on. It's also really going to help you keep things straight to remember not to talk about or maybe even think in terms of structures, systems, or really connections of any kind. Structural and systemic racism, structural, systemic, and institutional bias, structural inequity, systemic and institutional oppression, and just to drive it home, systems of power and oppression are all going to be off the table. You also can't say examine systems, but here the systems is for some reason in quotation marks, so maybe if you don't use your air quotes, you're okay to say it. I'm not sure here, but what is clear is that any concept that might highlight the fact that people who thought it was cool to own humans created a lasting way to do business that just so happens to function exactly as planned is not okay. Yeah, I know this kind of used to be what we thought the entire purpose of education was, like cause and effect, critical connection making, yada yada. But turns out Freire was wrong. Students actually are empty vessels into which we should be pouring our pre-digested factoids and power-baked ideologies so that they will become good little tech workers who always toe the party line. Best too not to mention culture, as you might accidentally utter cultural awareness, cultural relevance, cultural responsiveness, culturally responsive practices and teaching, or cultural proficiency. Not that I can tell you how exactly one becomes proficient at doing a culture, but I digress. Ditto for cultural appropriation or misappropriation, and we're really going to miss that last one, aren't we, Brad? Now please stop rapping while your teacher is talking. Implicit and explicit bias, and their synonyms, conscious and unconscious bias, the last of which is for some reason on the list twice, will be off limits even though they're pretty much basic psychology concepts. We'll keep quiet on colorism, or prejudice against people with dark skin, and on microaggressions, the everyday ways that those with power crap on oppressed people. Also on that note, we're not going to be able to say oppressor versus oppressed, but it's not clear if we can use each term by itself or if it's just going to be outlawed to use the two together, opposed as if like taking part in a boxing match. Next, don't talk about internalizing stuff. Internalized racial superiority, internalized racism, internalized white supremacy are out. You can say diversity, so long as you don't say diversity focused or diversity training. But Tina Love has been so effective in spreading her message that we won't be able to say abolitionist teaching. And we can't say land acknowledgement anymore, But hopefully that won't stop any of us from acknowledging that every day we exist on native land that was brutally stolen from its original inhabitants. Restorative justice and restorative practices are off the list, but who wants to restore things when you can just go buy new ones? Now, if I'm being honest, I had to look up a few of the terms on the list. Legal scholar Patricia Williams' term spirit murdering refers to the less physical ways that racism targets people of color. Action civics, because God forbid learning actually result in people doing something. Collective guilt, a psychology concept used to refer to how we feel when we realize our social group has screwed people over. And free radical therapy, along with free radical self/collective care, and obtuse meritocracy are terms that the politicians seem to have invented so that their list needs 4 rather than 3 pages of paper for printing purposes. A few words, if I'm being honest, we might not miss all that much. Interrupting racism used to mean something until us white folks made it sound like a game we play with capes and a scoreboard. Multiculturalism has been so thoroughly co-opted by assimilationist liberals that it means almost nothing. Equity and equitable are quickly reaching that point, as is diversity, equity, and inclusion. You apparently can't say all those words together. Social justice and inclusivity education are also becoming watered down to the point of uselessness, and some might say the same for affinity groups. And anti-bias training? Keep that one, at least until they find a training that actually works. And don't get me started on woke. Just take it and run. Also on the list, representation and inclusion, marginalized identities, protect vulnerable identities, identity deconstruction, deconstruct knowledges, decentering whiteness, centering or decentering, anti-meritocracy, social emotional learning, reflective exercises. You can't say reflective exercises. Okay, we're getting to the end here, I promise. Now, you may have noticed what's going on here. These politicians really don't want you to talk about the whiteness at the heart of our society. We may be about to have to pretend like white social capital and white privilege are figments of our imagination, and that every white person you know hasn't walked down the street in broad daylight doing something or other that a black person would have gone to jail for. And there are going to be some terrifying racists pissed that we can't talk about white supremacy anymore, because what else are they going to have left to brag about? And definitely do not mention the white fragility on display in this whole exercise. Apparently, white skin is a much thinner skin than a functional epidermis ought to be, and there unfortunately is not yet a cream on the market for this. So, in what you could reasonably call a huge effort to support hegemony at any cost, or in other words, to support the dominant discourses that promote the normativity of anti-blackness and also patriarchy, our elected leaders might be accused of throwing the First Amendment in the trash can, flipping the bird to marginalized/minoritized/underrepresented communities, and generally taking a royal dump on educational justice. And one final term that will be banned if this bill passes. No more will you be able to say critical race theory. So after this lesson, we're just going to pretend none of this ever happened. Sort of like we're apparently supposed to do with slavery, Jim Crow, U.S. immigration policy, Western expansionism, American wealth distribution, and pretty much 2/3 of this country's history. In fact, I've just gotten word that the name of this course may soon be changed to How to Make the Most of Your Selfie Stick. All right, class, I think we're done here. Go snap your chats or whatever you usually do when I'm talking. I'll see you at the bar in a few years or something.